Hello, and welcome to Pivotal Moments, a podcast where we share, explore, and celebrate stories of change, big or small. We're here to remind you we are all agents of change and have the power to pivot at any point, at any time. I'm your host, Siria Gutierrez, along with my co-host, Melissa Robina. Here at Pivotal Moments, we value celebrating success and small wins. So for today's episode, Melissa and I will be recapping our last 10 episodes and what we've learned along the way.
I'm so excited. We have 10 episodes under our belt.
That is a lot of episodes.
It is. And weren't you the one that told me, what is the average?
I want to say I read this a while back that it was something where people abandoned their podcast project after about 6 episodes. So
look at us. I'm excited. I'm excited. And, we talk about celebrating small wins. We talk about that periodically throughout our podcast. So how are we celebrating small wins?
One, acknowledging, I think, the fact that we have made it and now produced and dropped at this point 10 episodes into the world. I think that's pretty big.
I think it is pretty big. And I think, celebrating small wins, I know you and I congratulate ourselves all the time and just think we're so amazing. We're each other's biggest fans. And I think that, cheering each other along the way has been a lot of fun and keeps us going. I think.
I think so, especially because we have to be each other's cheerleaders and promote ourselves and do all those things that make it a little bit awkward, but at the same time, I think I got this one from Ron, which was, if you don't toot your own horn, then there's no music.
Nice. So before we dive into maybe our learnings and stuff, I do have a few appreciative questions that I'd like for both of us to answer. So one is, what has been the greatest contributions this podcast has made to our life?
The greatest contribution? Oh, that's a good question. I'm going to say there's so much growth that I've had this year. And I know this episode's dropping in October. I know between now and when this episode actually drops, there'll be that much more growth. But I think having a space to explore a lot of different areas of psychology and neuroscience and things that I really enjoy, it's surprising to me how much it's helping me heal on some other wounds or other things that I have. Just being able to kind of have a safe space to play in is kind of what I'm looking at. So I think that right now that's probably the biggest contribution. What about yourself?
It was also definitely growth, but I think also, you and I have talked about this before, where the podcast is definitely a source for healing for both of us. But I also think growth in taking risks. I do not like being in front of the camera, so doing social media, or even, when we do the playback of the pod, the content is fabulous, but I'm like, oh, my voice, but I think, taking risks, and I've enjoyed this so much, and I would never have pushed myself, or I shouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for the pod. The pod and working with you is continuously helping me learn new skills, try new things, and the results of which have been really good. I've received really great feedback, reconnected with old acquaintances, and just learning new things, all as a result of the podcast.
I like that. Those are good things. You're getting pushed, even this episode, right? You're like, come on, Melissa, we're going to do this episode.
So here's another question, and this kind of, I guess, dovetails off of the previous one, but this one's, would have been maybe a high point for you on this podcast journey?
A high point. Ooh, how about you first?
Okay, so for me, this goes back to when we interviewed Megan. So for those of you that didn't listen, Megan is a trans man and my brother. And, even though he and I grew up together, having the chance to interview him, I learned of so many things, not just of his particular journey, which he shared, but, just a greater appreciation for him. And not that I didn't love and care for him beforehand, but it's more so. And I'm not putting it into words, but it's just the level of appreciation and admiration for him in terms of using the adversity that he experiences to help propel him into advocacy. I am incredibly proud of him. And I to see him from a new lens, that's not something I would have had maybe the opportunity to do had the podcast not given us the environment to engage in that type of conversation. So I'm really appreciative. That's definitely a high point for me.
That makes a lot of sense. I think for me personally, when I'm thinking about the high points that we've had, two come to mind. One was probably the first time I listened to episode 3, and we had it fully produced, and our mics were both on point. And I know part of that was my issue on some of the things. So, later on, but just when I heard it, I was like, we sound legitimate. Like
we sound like grown-ups.
We sound like people, and we don't have a fancy studio. We are in your lovely office.
Thank you.
And you set this up every Sunday, but we're doing the best we can, and we get better every single episode. And so now, this many episodes in, when I hear whatever it is that we're going to put out into the world, and we might make a few additional edits, they're very small. It's not over edited at all. Thank you, Ron. But that definitely helps. And then I would say the second highlight for me was working on that skit for The Princess and the Mic. I had so much fun. Just not only like writing it was super fast, but then recording you and just having you be game. You're like, all right, fine. You want the fan blowing my hair? All right, whatever. You're so fucking weird. But like going through that, and then going through the process of editing that, just that whole thing, and having it come together with, your amazing acting skills.
Oh, right. They were on point, weren't they?
Yeah. Well, that, and then we had Ron narrating, and he
gave his narrating was so good.
Yeah, he gave us 2 different versions of it, and it was such a fun project to do for the project. Like, you just don't know where inspiration's going to hit and how you're going to be able to display that out into the greater world. So I think, for sure, getting to know people, doing the interviews, all that stuff's going to be fun, and that's going to continue. But I think for these, for this beginning part of it, just anything that we're doing, that we're trying new for the first time and seeing it come out way better than any expectations I could possibly have. Like, I think that's definitely been a huge highlight for me.
And I also think too, through the Rona, I think a lot of people, when they go on social media, they see people making videos at home, in their backyard, wherever. And I think that they're a lot more forgiving too, because I know, oh my gosh, I remember just wanting to do like backlashes, like the good Catholic girl that I am, because my mic was too hot in the first 2 episodes, or no, it was too hot the first one, and then I was like sounding far away in the second, and I felt bad. But the feedback we received, though, was that the content was good, and that, the sound might be off, but they knew that we were going to get there, and they had the trust and faith that we'd get there, and we have. And so that makes me feel really good that, people are very forgiving. And then, that also kind of leads me into forgiving myself. And I think that was something you had told me about. I think this wasn't even one of our recording sessions. I think this was, you came over and we were doing a planning session, and you're like, I know you want it to be perfect, but you have to give yourself permission that it's not going to be. And I think by giving myself some permission and letting it free flow, I think it does so much better, sounds so much better. It's so much more real. And I think that that's what people are looking for. I know that's what I really enjoy about our conversations.
I like our conversations too.
All right, so welcome back. So in the first few episodes, we recapped the emotional reasons why people pivoted. And then we started a new series about the types of pivots people make that included intentional pivots, natural reasons why we pivot, life-changing events, and forced pivots. So of those 4, Siria, is there something from one of those episodes that stuck out with you most? And if so, what was it?
I think there were a lot of different things that stuck out, but I think for me, the forced pivots, our last episode, really stood out because I got so excited about it earlier on than was in the schedule. And I really got into that, just wanting to talk about the Scared Straight program. And, I know.
And your FOMO for not being able to go to prison with your friends?
Yes, on that part. So I think that's stuck out, just kind of the unintended consequences that sometimes people can find themselves in from probably people trying to do something good, but not really understanding what the full consequences are of something. And so just kind of that one definitely stuck out. That was probably the most recent. I also really enjoyed, learning your skinny bitch journey and you being a good sport about calling it that, because I know it was a lot of hard work for you to do and getting into that.
It was hard work. And again, coming back to that vulnerable piece, it definitely wasn't an easy journey to share, but I'm glad that I did, because, the more that you share, I think it's almost like a weight has been lifted. And then too, sometimes we feel alone. Especially, it can just feel like there's just so many things going on with like news and social media that it almost like overshadows us. And I think knowing that other people have walked that journey that, you're currently on feels good, because you're not alone, and there's, strength to pull from that. For me, I really enjoyed the types of pivots. I did like the force pivot, because, we mentioned this in the life-changing events, which was the Rona. But I mean, the force pivot can go underneath there too, where it's forcing us to change our lives. But when we talked about the Rona in the life-changing event episode, how rare is it that us as a species, an entire collective human species, actually go through a life-changing event all at the same time? It's very rare. So I found that to be interesting. And when I do my research for these topics, I never know where it's going to take me. So in episode 8, when we talked about social constructionism, I didn't really think about how, when we talk about like natural reasons why we change, I'm like, well, who I was at 16 isn't who I am today, but why is that? And so when I came across the theory of social constructionism and how we are constructing or co-constructing our reality with one another based on the conversations and interactions we had, not only did I find that fascinating, but it really made me look at what energy I'm bringing to the world. How am I interacting with people? And maybe spending a little bit more time in the types of conversations I'm having with people, because my interaction with them could potentially shift how they interact with others or their worldview, which I think, again, comes back to this podcast. Here we are putting something out in the world that people are going to listen to, which could, impact or change how they interact with others, i.e., for example, the trans community when we, spoke with Megan. Mm-hmm. And so I think that just raised its level of importance for me. And so the theory of social constructionism was actually probably my biggest highlight.
You totally went ham.
I went ham on the science.
You sure did.
Yeah.
And that's okay, though, because if it's something that you enjoyed and that you wanted to come out of it, because I think, in that same episode, I was talking about the phases that we all go through. If you reach a certain age, you're going to go through puberty. You're going to go through different changes. You're going to go from a young adult into an adult, and your loved ones are going to pass away. And all of that stuff comes with age. But I think with your connection to the social constructionism, and really more your connection to all of us going through the Rona at the same time, it's like these are things that are going to happen because we're being influenced by the outside world. And hey, guess what? We're also being forced into this. Mm-hmm. Okay. How we deal with the current situation and how we interact in the world as a result of it, that's still going to be an individual choice. Whether or not you decide to wear a mask, please wear a mask. But if you decide not to, that is an individual choice. But that's also being shaped by that social constructionism that's going on right now.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I just found that the fact that theory is woven into everything, every Facebook post you read, every Instagram post you engage with, that is all constructing your reality. And I was mind blown after that one. So mm-hmm. it was a good episode. But
did you do anything different as a result of learning of that? Like, are you being more mindful about where you spend your time and who you spend it with?
I think I've done that before, and that was actually from our first reflection when I was talking about boredom and how I would always just constantly, try to fit my calendar and make it full despite what it was. No, I think the reason why that social constructionism stuck out for me, because I practice trying to be appreciative, especially, working in the field of appreciative inquiry. A lot of my emails and correspondence with others are written in a in a nice form because I'm trying to be mindful of that. But it's just,
What does that mean, though, for our listeners who've heard us and maybe aren't as familiar with appreciative inquiry? What does it mean to have your questions in an appreciative form?
so that they're written that, in an unconditionally positive way, so that the answer elicited by whomever you're asking the question to is also positive. An easy example I can share would be, oftentimes when we're coming home from work, what's the first thing you would ask your spouse, your partner, your child? How was your day? And, parents out there, you're probably listening thinking like, well, I usually get if I can even get them to look up from the phone, I either get a grunt or fine, good.
It's okay.
It's okay.
It's okay.
But if you ask them, well, what was the best part of your day? That you don't get the yes or no. You get an actual answer that hopefully can then start to engage in further dialogue. So it's meant to be a tool to help create generative dialogue so that it continues to go and it's not just fine. So that's what I work on. But
and you do that for the podcast too. Like, we've had a few interviews, and these are things that you'll notice.
I hope so. I hope to bring that flavor into the podcast, because I've seen it work in person, and just by framing the questions in that way, I think that, it just makes the conversation or the answer more rich and deeper than I would have if I was just asking a closed-ended question. And I think that was something I had told you, is that even when I'm starting to practice coaching, I didn't realize how many closed-ended questions that we as people typically ask. Doesn't mean that you don't care about what that person did that day or who they interacted with, but maybe the questions and the way we frame them aren't the most open. But yeah, coming back to social constructionism, to me, that's just, it's fascinating, because I had no idea how deep rooted it is in everything that we do. And I think it just makes me be even more mindful to practice that in an appreciative way. Let's see. Another thing that really stuck out for me, let's talk about Meg's interview.
Yes.
So I know that in the beginning of Megan's interview, we shared with him openly that, God, we just thought he was going to talk about his transition. And, and that when he shared his story about, experiencing discrimination from a member of the medical community, I was pleasantly surprised. And the story he shared was so powerful and relatable on so many different levels. But even more than that, I think it showed me how often when someone else is speaking, I'm already starting to construct my reply. And, so I had this preconceived idea of what he was going to be sharing. So I was already tailoring my questions for the interview based on that. So when we got that form, it really made me pause and think about, like, whoa, why am I trying to steer his conversation in any way? And by giving him the space to fill out the form as he did, he paved that way. And we got such a better story. So it taught me, and this is what I do for a living, right? I write questions, and I didn't realize that I was trying to help steer the conversation where I thought we should be going. And so that was a nice little wake-up call for me.
Mm-hmm. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And with his interview, there's so much content. We talked for so long.
Yeah.
And, that's why we broke it up into 2 episodes, because we want to be mindful for our listeners and how they listen. But also because we didn't want to shortchange Megan. He had a lot of really good things to say, and he said them so well.
Oh,
and
articulate. Yes.
Super articulate, but just also the compassion. I mean, when Megan talked about just knowing that he wasn't anyone's ideal, like, my heart was breaking, because I know so many people, trans or not, who feel that. And they just feel like nobody's going to want me because I've never really had a boyfriend before, or I've never had a long-term relationship. I'm in my late 30s. I've never had a serious relationship. And, women get suspicious and are like, what's wrong with you? Or, all these other things. And it was just like, man, it's got to be that much harder when now you're finally able to live your truth, live the way that you want to be seen, and yet you're still dealing with that with that concern of, yeah, I know I'm nobody's ideal, but you know what? I still deserve to be loved. And I think he said, I'm still a kind person. I still have compassion. I have all these other qualities that you would still want in a partner. And so I have those things. Maybe I don't have a penis, but that's not what's going to make up who I am completely as a person, right? Like that's one part of it. And so I just think the more we talk to people who are quote unquote different, the more we're going to realize we really aren't that different. There might be different things that were going on. We may have different experiences, and we may have different upbringings, and just, that's just going to be the nature of humanity. But when it comes down to it, like we're all people trying to do our best in the world.
And I think you had mentioned it before that we have more in common than we think. And I think that for me, the stories are what bind us together. And I think through storytelling, we can see that, Megan is a beautiful transgender man. And, his story was talking about medical discrimination. I haven't shared my story, but that was also something I had experienced. But, so there's that commonality too. And I think the more people that we can get on to share their stories, I think that our listeners are going to see that we are all woven from the same fabric, and you're right. There are going to be differences, between us, but there's so much that connect us, so much.
Yes. And I would much rather not snuff out anybody's individuality.
Oh,
that's
never.
not it.
Yeah.
But I would much rather be focusing more on what we have in common and where we can find common ground rather than not. I'm in a profession that is surprisingly conservative at times. And I've had a lot of really outspoken colleagues who lean on the complete other side of me, but we're still able to have conversations and we're still able to talk, even though, I know that politically we're not going to be voting the same way. I like to focus on what we do have in common, and there are things that we can agree on, and sometimes like assault rifles, like, yeah, we tend to agree that those maybe shouldn't be for the entire public, but it's nice to have that ability to see that commonality and just to have it worded from a guest, and worded so beautifully.
Oh, he did such an excellent job.
Such a fantastic job with that, and just really make you connect, because these are fears we all have. And I think that goes into Brene Brown's teachings, right? Of just the more you share, the more vulnerable you are with people, the less shame you're going to feel. And the more shameful something feels is the more reason that you need to try to share it, because the reason people cut themselves off is because they fear being judged, and they fear not being able to connect because of whatever baggage they may have or experiences that they had. And what turns out to be true is that actually the more you share with someone, the more trust you have.
Oh, absolutely. That was actually something my counselor and I had been working on, because, we often have this preconceived notion that if I share and if someone doesn't like it, it makes me weak, right? Keep it all in, suppress it. But the more you share, you're right, you are being vulnerable, but you're also starting to build that bridge of trust and commonality. And in return, others then start to share. So it's reciprocated. And then that's where you get that trust, that camaraderie, that friendship that really then can really move mountains. We're talking about people making changes individually, but I think collectively, imagine what we could do.
I think we could do a whole lot of good. I'm excited about it.
Dear listeners, we want to hear from you. You can join our Facebook group, Pivotal Moments HQ, where we have discussions on our episodes. We also don't ask this at the end of each episode, but during our recaps, we will ask, please rate and review our podcast wherever you listen to the pod. It helps new listeners be able to find us. We want to thank our producer and music director, Ron Johnson. This has been an Astronomicus DMR production. Thank you for listening, and remember, it's never too late and you're right on time.